Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 11th of January 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, the weather seems to have taken a turn for the better. It's very cold here in Plymouth, but we have got some blue sky. Grey and rainy in Holland. Well, sorry about that. We've got no reports for weather in France. Scotland the same, actually. Not sure what's going on there. But apparently we've got big blue patches in Surrey, and Norfolk is dry. So a pretty mixed bag across UK and a little bit of the continent, as they say. What's happening in UK? Well, we are continuing to focus on the rise of the British police state. And perhaps a very good place to start our reporting today is news of Tom Crawford's son's court case. So this is 7 people who were trying to support Tom Crawford to stop his house being unlawfully taken as a result of fraudulent mortgages. We were hoping for a report from Guy Taylor. Guy's still tied up in the court, but he's asked us just to give you a bit of information. Now, of course, remember it was Guy Taylor who spoke early last year at the BCG conference, specifically talking about corruption in British courts. And of course, Guy has absolutely stayed on the trail of that, and he's been helping Tom Crawford in the background. For those of you who don't know, Tom Crawford, of course, was the man forced out of his home as a result of what he says is a fraudulent mortgage. We believe that is the case. And the circumstances grew in the public domain to the extent that it ended up with about 600 people there to support him and massive police presence. Well, sometime later, Tom's son, Craig, and 6 other people were attempting to recover the property. Thank you, Mike. And although their actions were totally peaceably, they've ended up in court, and that's Leicester Crown Court. One of those actually in court today with Tom's son is Mark Salon. Of course, Mark himself a great campaigner against what's going wrong in UK. And according to Guy Taylor, it's been very, very interesting how this case has proceeded, because essentially 4 of the defendants are represented by barristers. 3 of them are representing themselves. But Judge Fowler made it quite clear at the start of the case that he wasn't going to allow those self-litigants any able assistance. So, of course, whilst the barristers representing their clients in court can have teams of people to look up data, check out information on the legal databases and the internet, the judge was making absolutely sure that effectively the litigants in person were not given that same status. That seems to me, Mike, to be a complete contradiction to equity of arms, where people should have the same facilities made available to them in court. Well, if that is one strange factor about this court case, the second one we're probably not surprised about, and that is that still, as this case proceeds, no warrant has been produced in court as the legal and lawful basis for the seizure of the house in the first place. So no warrant has been produced, neither has the audit trail of documents which will be necessary in order to requisition that warrant in the first place. So it seems that knowingly or unknowingly, the judge at the moment is making sure that the key document was this seizure of the house lawful. The judge is seemingly helping the situation by making sure that document doesn't appear in court. So we should have a report later today by Guy Taylor, and hopefully we'll be able to bring that out in tomorrow's news. Pretty incredible stuff. And we'll just put up the face of Michael Doherty here, because this is another man who's had personal experience of the sheer corruption around some of Britain's police men and women, and indeed within the courts. Well, if corruption in the court is an important issue for many people, Let's take a look at Plymouth MP Oliver Colville, because the BBC is now boasting that there's to be a hedgehog summit after his personal campaign to save the hedgehog. So never mind crumbling infrastructure, floods, the abuse of children, criminal activity in court, treason in Westminster. Here we've got a Tory MP. Somebody suggested to me, Mike, that this man is beginning to regress into his childhood.
Is he regressing into a hedgehog, maybe?
Well, here's a picture of him. There is a bit of similarity. But what is particularly worrying is that following on from his focus on hedgehogs, he's now welcoming child refugees into UK. These MPs not doing their job, but the moment there's children, they're very
keen to get involved.
Very keen to get involved, not so keen to get involved, of course, when it's the abuse of children. Then we don't want to know, we don't want to talk about what's going on. That must lead us to wars.
Well, certainly leads us to Syria. So this is Defence One, and the Council of Foreign Relations, Mika Zenko, writing in Defence One, and he's suggesting that the United States military is really doing some spectacular work here, because they have apparently killed 20,000 ISIS fighters. But we were told that there were 30,000 ISIS fighters, so they've apparently killed 20,000 of them. But it seems that there are still 30,000 ISIS fighters. So it's a bit unclear how this can happen. Unless, of course, if we look at this a bit more seriously for a second, what's actually going on is that they're not disrupting recruitment in any way, shape or form. In fact, recruitment into ISIS is building. And that's why, despite the fact that they claim that they've killed 20,000 ISIS fighters, there are still 30,000 ISIS fighters. So they're generating new people to join ISIS. They're creating the extremism.
Indeed. Obviously, Mike, if we look at the number of people who have been affected by the wars, we're talking about millions of people who, it would seem to me, quite rightly could have a grudge against the British or the American governments for bombing their homes, killing their families. And our own government is expressing surprise that they don't seem to be able to bomb this problem out of existence. Quite extraordinary. Well, of course, if we're going to have honest reporting on what's going on, should we be looking for the BBC? This was something you picked up last year, Mike, and it was talking about the regulator going for Russia Today because of the bias in their reports and their outrageous anti-Western views. So presumably Ofcom totally happy with what the BBC's been up to.
Well, I guess they are, but well, the BBC is part of this bit that we're about to do here. But basically, on Friday, of course, we were hearing from Vanessa Beeley with regard to the situation in Madaya in Syria, and mainstream media here, including the BBC, reporting that aid convoys are now on the move to bring aid to Madaya and also to Fua and Kafraya in northern Syria. Now, just to remind ourselves where Madaya is, it's just off the Lebanese border there. You know, we were pointing out that, of course, the issue here is not Assad's government. Assad's government maintaining the siege around Madaya, but Assad's government has never prevented access for aid to any of these areas, contrary to what the mainstream media is reporting, and especially the BBC. Now, as Vanessa pointed out on Friday, the propaganda over Madaya has been in overdrive. The aim is to blame the Syrian government for all the problems. And we showed some of the images of emaciated people, including this little girl, who we now know is living in South Lebanon. And we demonstrated that images were being distributed, including by media outlets which were not from Madaya at all, including this one, which is about a year old, well, almost a year old, and from a refugee camp nowhere near Madaya. So we also mentioned how these types of images were being distributed. We mentioned how Vice News had to retract the images that it was using because it discovered they weren't from Madaya either. And since there's been such a Twitter storm over the use of bogus images and propaganda, it's doubly surprising, or perhaps not, that Vanessa has caught the BBC doing exactly the same thing. So here we are. This is the report. It's from Jim Muir, and it begins with a warning that some of the images are disturbing, and it carries the usual images that are appearing everywhere, like this and like this, and it includes this young man, except that this young man is not in Madaya. He was in Yarmouk in 2014. So the BBC caught in the act with its pants down, absolutely using this type of propaganda within its own reports. So just to reiterate the point, I'm going to show two reports here, two short excerpts here. The first one is from the BBC report, and the second one is from the YouTube channel that we've just seen from 2014. And really, it makes the point that these are the same video clips. So here we go.
Back in October, when the last
So as you may have noticed, the first one had the BBC logo at the top left. The second one didn't. The first was from the BBC saying that this took place in Madaya over the weekend. And this YouTube video pointing out that this guy was speaking to camera in 2014. So the BBC once again absolutely being caught out, which is pretty ironic. I do apologise. Some time ago, Jim Muir had this little article on the Inside BBC Journalism blog all about accuracy and truth. So it does seem a little ironic that he's been caught out. I did send an email to him this morning. I haven't had any response. I don't think that's terribly unsurprising, is it?
No, it's not. But I think we ought to be saying or asking people, Mike, that really this is so serious. We've got the BBC deliberately this isn't just incompetence, because this has happened before. So the BBC deliberately misleading the British public in order to carry out the government's political agenda, which is basically hostile to a nation state. I think we should be asking for our viewers and listeners to take up the cause themselves, write to the BBC, phone, email the BBC, and ask them to justify how the BBC is putting out this propaganda. Unless the public challenges the BBC on this, it's going to continue. Honest, open reporting, propaganda machine.
Absolute propaganda machine. And of course, one country which absolutely bears the brunt of much of the propaganda is North Korea. I find North Korea quite an interesting country. I'd like to know a lot more about it. It's very hard to find out what the truth is about it, and you never know whether what you're reading is true or not. But nonetheless, following the furore last week over North Korea's claim to have tested a new nuclear weapon, the North Korean Central News Agency has issued an editorial pointing out that the Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq and the Gaddafi regime in Libya could not escape the fate of destruction after being deprived of their foundations for nuclear development and giving up nuclear programs of their own accord, yielding to the pressure of the US and the West to keep keen on their regime changes. So this quote from the North Korean Central News Agency was quoted by Associated Press, and they then asked, actually, what moral authority does any country have that has nuclear weapons of their own to demand that any other country which is developing nuclear weapons should stop? I unfortunately didn't put the slide in here, but Reuters as well was reporting that, not in any threatening way, of course, the United States decided that following the North Korean statement that they would fly a B-52 bomber across South Korea alongside some F-15s and F-16s. And although the Western press was reporting that this aircraft was nuclear capable, the Korean Herald coverage was saying that it was actually armed with nuclear weapons at the time. So no incitement there whatsoever.
Right. I'll just say on North Korea, some time ago, somebody asked me if I'd ever watched any North Korean propaganda, and I had to admit that aside from reports on television, I hadn't. And they said, well, it's very interesting because if you go on YouTube and look up North Korean propaganda, it is pretty in-your-face propaganda, except they said, interestingly enough, it often tells the exact truth about what is going on in the West, in UK, in America. So whatever the regime in North Korea is, it still seems to have the ability to analyse our lives accurately and work out that, of course, we in Britain or Americans in the USA not being told the truth by their own political parties. And then, of course, we've had the North Koreans removing data from websites at the same time that David Cameron was removing data from the Conservative Party website. So some similarities with the leaders when it comes to making sure people haven't got information.
Okay, tonight, usual setup for Monday night, Humanity versus Insanity at 7:30. Ian will be joined by Pippa King, who's talking about the acceleration of the programming for microchip agenda. Now, she has discovered that Richmond Sausages, a sausage making company, is putting millions of pounds into a campaign to get children to microchip their teddy bears. Now, what on earth is a sausage company getting involved in this type of campaign for? This is really what we're wondering. And then at 9 o'clock, Fracking Nightmare, we'll have David Balin from who's chairman of the Residents Association, where the massive gas leak is in California, and also Claire Rimmer, who is from the Fyle Peninsula, who's campaigning against the creation of these massive gas caverns just around the Fyle Peninsula for storage of gas. And bearing in mind that what David Balin is going to be talking about is this gas leak, which is coming from exactly one of these types of gas caverns. That's what the subject is tonight at 9 o'clock in Fracking Nightmare. ukcolumn.org/live.
Presumably this is the sort of information, Mike, that's worrying the UK government to the extent that Ian Crane needs to be arrested when he was at Exeter Airport. The truth coming out about the dangers of fracking and gas storage. So I think that's going to be quite a programme tonight. Well, just a brief mention of Hillary and America. The White House dossier is reporting that evidence is now fully coming to light over the fact that Hillary was manipulating the classified markings on documents, or rather worse, she was getting other people to interfere with those security markings so that she could then use the information herself for her own political purposes. So that White House dossier report, extremely interesting. And of course, the minimum it says is that in the States, as in UK, we've got the same situation, which is there's one rule for the public and then a completely different rule if you're a politician. So if you want to catch up on Hillary's dirty dealing, please do. Well, I have to say, Mike, it was you that was speaking early last year about the massive attack on Britain's constitution, and you were talking about the reform agenda, but we are really seeing a dictatorship unfolding at remarkable speed at the moment. And this was another document which you'd picked up on.
Yeah, this is the Vox Political blog, and highlighting really what David Cameron is attempting to do to the opposition parties in terms of funding. So I'll just read a little of this. It says, the Tory attack on opposition party funding is unprecedented and evil. David Cameron and his cronies, desperate to neuter the Labour Party, neuter a Labour Party that is finding its popularity again after decades as a pale pink shadow of hard right conservative policies, have thrown caution to the wind. Their latest attack on the trade unions that defend UK workers' rights against the naked aggression of Tory supporting businesses will remove £6 million from Labour's annual income, and they're also unilaterally cutting public funding received by opposition parties, the so-called short money. Under long-standing convention, issues of party funding are agreed on a cross-party basis. The Tories have scrapped this in their bid to end parliamentary democracy. And so it goes on. I do recommend you read it. I mean, it obviously is coming from a left-wing point of view, but that I don't think that really matters in this case, because the issues are much bigger than left-wing or right-wing politics. And the question is, why is the Tory party allowed to receive millions and millions from arms dealers and the like, and the Labour Party isn't allowed to receive any money from unions? What is that about?
Tory party is the lead machine for the dictatorship, Mike, I think is what it's about.
It was kind of a rhetorical question.
Indeed. Well, let's reinforce that. This is an email that was sent through to me. I viewed with interest the Crane report in which he was detained at Exeter Airport. What I found interesting was the confiscation and copying of his phone. I'll just highlight the main bit of it. Theresa May's expansion of the Investigatory Powers Act 2000 is more worrying, as the power she has now proposed goes far beyond a dictatorship. The expansion of the Clause 61 Part 4 is worrying, as there's no right of appeal. Part 5 states that data can be obtained for any number of reasons, including any investigation of a crime, however minor. The fact that this will contradict PACE and also the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights is also worrying. As Mrs May stated, the retained data will include what, where, when and how. This means every visited website, every map, every email contact, every GPS location search. Also includes every device connected to every Wi-Fi network in the UK, and that just about covers everything. As she states, the retained data will be huge. Who watches the watchers? So somewhere in amongst that retained data is poor old Ian Crane's phone. Well, that was a very, very timely and very astute email, which of course is really pointing to the danger of what's now starting to happen with more or less unbelievable speed in Britain. We have got a dictatorship established in this country. It hasn't got the power it wants at the moment, but that's what they're working on. So we thought we would take a look again into what Theresa May has been up to. And it was back in 2011 that the UK column was warning that Theresa May was at the centre of a massive state spying network, and it was to spy on every person, and it was backed by the ability to section those who criticised. Now, I know you're going to come on to mental health in a minute, but of course remember that dangerous dictatorships always want to use mental health as a weapon. We warned about the MAPA teams set up in units across UK to spy on people who somebody, a member of the local authority or the NHS or the education, says is a potential troublemaker. We've now got the new PREVENT strategy, encouraging people to spy on each other, and we've got that investigatory powers bill coming in. So unless we, the public, stand up to be counted, David Cameron is bringing the USSR, and this is with facilities, electronic computer facilities, databases, which of course the Stasi would have loved to have. So this is really the type of very dangerous politician that we've got in Britain. The Independent here, though, picking up and saying UK spying laws have been criticised by the government's own watchdog, as Theresa May's claim that the Snoopers Charter doesn't block encryption is scrutinised. On this Independent page, there's an embedded video, which is Theresa May talking. You might like to have a look. She talks about the new extremism analysis unit. Don't worry, Mike, it'll deal with visa applications. But it's going to grow, and ultimately, she says it will inform all areas of the government and public sector regarding with whom we should engage and not engage. So remember this organisation that we don't seem to know much about is going to tell us who is okay and who is a potential terrorist. Mm-hmm. But we're going to start it off by saying, well, they're just going to look at visa applications. It will make sure that nobody unwittingly gives legitimacy or credibility to extremist organisations. It will inform the development of a counter-entryism strategy and entryist tactics. Now, I was very interested with entryism because I wasn't too sure what that's about.
Looks like a new word to me.
It looks like a new word, 1984 type word. But actually, entryism is people who are coming into the country.
Oh.
We used to call that sort of border controls, but now it's entryism and it's entryist tactics. She had trouble delivering this speech. It's quite interesting to watch. She looked highly uncomfortable all the way through, stuttered over some of the words and phrases, presumably because entryism isn't yet in the vocabulary. But this little dangerous phrase, we will promote the work of civil society organisations. So we've got big society coming in with literally thousands of government recruited activists, and these people are going to be brought into this state spying network. It's pretty incredible stuff. What have we got here? Well, this is basically a freedom of information request. I'm sorry, don't pay attention to the red lines at the moment. You'll see it in a minute. But basically, somebody had put in a request saying, what is the role of the Extremism Analysis Unit? Is there a document setting out its remit? If so, could you provide it? Well, this was the response. And the response says, we've balanced the public interest considerations for and against release of the information you request and found that the public interest falls in favour of not giving it. So here we've got the Home Office itself admitting that we've now got this dangerous spying unit set up. It's so secret that the public's not even able to see the definitive document as to what it's up to. And
I mean, surely even MI5 and MI6, we've got terms of reference for in the public for what they do.
Well, and we've got supposed scrutiny committees with cross-party positions on them. So this is something incredibly dangerous because it seems to be something that's buried in government, that's secret even from people in the government itself. But look at this, because when we see, read on in the response to that Freedom of Information request, the Home Office says that the EAU, Extremist Analysis Unit, will use the agreed government definition of extremism, and that is the vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and the mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. We also regard calls for the death of members of our armed forces as extremist. So that's what they say. Who made up these rules? We don't know. Who is the analysis? Who does the analysis unit comprise? We don't know that either. We can't see the document trail. This is a dictatorship, Mike.
Yeah.
Right. So who puts the British values together? Well, here he is. So David Cameron is the man saying that anyone who stands up and challenges his call that you're going to be loyal to British values, you're a potential extremist. And it's odd, if we look at conservative British values over the recent years, they've been lies, cover-ups, wars, child abuse, torture, support for criminal banks. If you challenge that, you're an extremist.
Yeah.
And these people look at North Korea and say that it's a disgusting regime being run there. Is it my imagination, Michael? Some of this stuff is so blatant now, surely people can see through it. Well, let's remember that David Cameron was also saying that if you don't back our desire to attack Syria, you're also a terrorist. So there were a number of mainstream press reports that we've shown before. So this is David Cameron's, whose beliefs are not in Britain and British values. He says his beliefs in Israel are unshakable. So there's a little bit of duplicitous politics there. Is he supporting Britain as his nation state, or is he supporting the views and values of Israel? Well, he said he's supporting Israel, so total hypocrisy. But even if you're leader of the opposition and you dare challenge what David Cameron says, then you're a bunch of terrorist sympathisers. This man, David Cameron, is unbelievably dangerous, Mike. And I think of the front page of the UK column where we had him labelled as a domestic terrorist. I think we were spot on. Well, what's the Independent been talking about? This was their comment on the PREVENT strategy. We've shown this before, but basically a number of people saying this is another layer of the British government spying on its own citizens in their counter-terrorism strategy, and it will have a chilling effect on open debate, free speech and political dissent. Well, you couldn't put it plainer than that. How do we show what's going on as simply as possible? Well, we think a UK column wiring diagram is necessary. So let's bring in Theresa May. She sits at the heart of a network of all the main security agencies, plus MAPA, plus the policing units, plus the anti-terrorism units. We've got David Cameron calling for more state spying power. We've got that prevent duty, which has now come in, which simply says, be afraid and spy on your neighbour, spy on your family members. We've got GCHQ, of course, now known to have been spying on the British public, but even better than that, selling our data back to US organisations who've been putting money into GCHQ. There's the corporatisation of the intelligence community. And I think some people would say this is a dog's breakfast. This is the Cabinet Office with its connections through to not only the Applied Behavioural Psychology Unit, but to Israeli secret services and Israeli spying. How can anybody say we don't have a dictatorship building in this country at the moment? It's quite incredible. Well, what do you need on top of that organisation to complete it? We're in now to Mike's comment on mental health, and a little while ago we were flagging up this sort of information, so the population being primed that 1 in 4 is going to suffer mental health problems. We've got suicides breaking out in school children and groups across the country. Lib Dems said they were going to sort that out, Mike. I don't know whether they've actually done anything. I don't remember seeing anything.
No.
Okay. We're going to kill off anybody who's weak or old or vulnerable. And more of that in The Guardian, assisted dying bill held up in the House of Lords. So what's David Cameron got to say at the moment?
Well, you pointed out that mental health and this issue is one of the key issues when you've got a dictatorship. It is a key issue. So here we've got David Cameron saying that they are going to put £1 billion of investment to enhance mental health services across the country. Now, we've been told for quite some time now that the NHS is failing with regard to mental health, so we've got to deal with this. And he's going to do it by putting £290 million to help new and expectant mums who have poor mental health, apparently. And then we're going to, there's actually 4 main points. We're going to have the first ever waiting time targets to be introduced for teenagers with eating disorders and people experiencing psychosis, £250 million for mental health services in hospital emergency departments, and £400 million to enable 24/7 in communities as safe and effective alternative to hospital. Now, of course, the question that has to be asked, Brian, is under the surface of this, what will this money actually be spent on? Does David Cameron actually care about the mental health of individuals in this country? I don't think so. So perhaps, I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen, but perhaps there's a different infrastructure being built here, one which they don't want to make public just yet.
This is the Gulag.
That is, yeah, exactly.
This is the Gulag.
Exactly. So apparently David Cameron has said that mental health isn't contagious. I have to say, if you look at the House of Commons,
it clearly is.
It clearly is contagious.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's nothing to be frightened of. As a country, we need to be far more mature about this, less hushed tones, less whispering, more frank and open discussion. If I thought for 1 minute that this man had the best interests of individuals at heart, then I would applaud this initiative for £1 billion to be spent on mental health. But I don't believe that that's what's going on. And I think, as you say, we're seeing the Gulag being built.
And of course, if you go for mums and babies, what you're really going for is the future generation of children. So this is, I think, this is particularly sinister. Is this another part of heralding in the named person scheme south of the border? Well, if you're feeling motivated by what we're reporting today, perhaps you might like to get in contact with the Home Office. Here's the contact details, and challenge that response of freedom of information that you, the public, well, you've already made the decision. You don't want to see the information about this extremism unit. Enough people speaking out, challenging the Home Office, challenging Theresa May, can bring this thing out into the open. If we don't, where is it going to go? Well, it's going to go to basically the Black Mariahs turning up at 3 in the morning. That picture taken in UK, so it's not somewhere overseas. These are the people in the blacked out cars entering and leaving Downing Street. And of course, we've got David Cameron and the rest of his, well, I think some of them must be fairly close to mentally ill MPs in Westminster, absolutely terrified of the public, which are why, of course, we've got Jack Straw and his cohorts at the moment working out how they can remove parts of the Freedom of Information Act that are considered worrying. So we'll push the topic home because, of course, Ian Puddick, who suffered terribly at the hands of City of London police, was somebody else that we've had on the stage talking about the rise of the police state. So not just our imagination, many other people starting to point out the dangers. What do you need for a good dictatorship, Mike, is some money, of course.
But there isn't any. And this is Reuters reporting how since the 1st of January, the bond market has absolutely frozen up. So what they're saying is not a single bond, this is senior financial bond, has been successfully issued in Europe since the 1st of January. And Reuters is saying that it's absolutely blaming the initiation of the bail-in policy in Europe as being the reason for it. And that's especially with regard to the Portuguese central bank's bail-in of Novo Banco bondholders. And the Reuters report saying that banks raised over $16.5 billion euros. It's equivalent to 16.5 billion across euros, sterling, and US dollars. In the first week of 2015, they raised 18 billion in 2014, but in the first week of 2016, they raised a total of zero, absolutely nothing raised. And that's the first time that that's happened since 2008 during the financial crash. So Reuters is quoting the head of an investment fund who said what happened with Novo Banco ought to remind investors that regulators will do what suits them in times of distress. So this is really an acknowledgement by at least one investment fund manager that we are in a time of distress. So banks can't raise money at the moment, and that possibly explains why we're starting to see rising costs of just running a bank account at the moment, as many outlets have been discussing today. But more importantly, this maybe gives another clue from Zero Hedge yesterday. And I'll just read the first paragraph of this because it says Chinese stocks are trading at the lows of the day after overnight HIBOR rates, and this is the Hong Kong interbank borrowing rate, exploded a stunning 939 basis points to a record high of 13.4%. It's clear that banks are utterly desperate for liquidity and or are extremely concerned about one another's counterparty risk. In other words, there is a crash on. And what Zero Hedge is saying is this has dragged HSCEI down 5%, its lowest since October 2011. Something just snapped. And since the beginning of the year, we're absolutely seeing that something has, in so many areas, absolutely snapped with regard to the financial markets. So hold on to your hats.
More to come. That brings us to the end of today's news. Just like to say thank you, as always, to the people who've sent us emails and texts of giving us support or information. We're always keen to get information and reports from people. I'll just say apologies that I didn't manage to cover the flood defences, which I said I would. We will cover that tomorrow. And also, we've got some court cases coming up. Melanie Shaw is due back in court, and Ian Crane. Both of them would like some public support to see justice being done. Very important that the public is present in these court cases. We know it stimulates the judges to at least stay awake, even if it can't affect their decision-making process. And also, thank you very much to those of you who've made donations over the last few days. Thank you very much for that. Anything else to report, Mike?
No, hopefully we'll see you at 7:30 for the Crane Report.
Indeed. Okay, thanks for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.